They didn't have fine wine, white tablecloths, or imported olive oil. What they had was grit and a pot of boiling water. In the early 1900s, Italian immigrants arrived in the US by the millions, more than 2 million between 1900 and 1910 alone. They came because in southern Italy, the land was exhausted, taxes were crushing, and opportunities were almost non-existent. Once they landed in neighborhoods like New York's Little Italy, they turned survival into flavor. They stretched scraps into suppers, traded stories in steam-filled kitchens, and built a food culture that would outlive them all. Forget Alfredo and endless breadsticks. These were the real pasta recipes that kept families alive through the hardest years. Every dish tells a story of hunger, hope, and how a few cents of flour and tomato could feed an entire dream. Because in those narrow streets, pasta wasn't luxury, it was identity. And by the end of this video, you'll never look at a bowl of spaghetti the same way again. 1. Macaroni with tomato and garlic. Before there were fancy sauces and imported cheeses, there was macaroni with tomato and garlic. The working man's dinner on Mulberry Street. In the 1900s, Italian mothers stood over coal stoves, simmering crushed tomatoes, with a few cloves of garlic and a drizzle of cheap oil. The scent filled every hallway, cutting through the noise of the city below. It wasn't about abundance. It was about making flavor out of nothing. A handful of pasta, a spoonful of sauce, and hope that everyone got enough. Children fought for the last strands, sopping up the leftover red with hunks of bread. No basil, no parmesan, no pretense, just warmth in a bowl. In those tight New York kitchens, this humble meal meant family, pride, and survival. And though it cost just a few pennies back then, it fed something priceless: belonging. For every immigrant who missed home, one bite of macaroni brought Italy back to life. 2. Ravioli in light tomato sauce. In the cramped kitchens of Little Italy, ravioli in light tomato sauce wasn't a luxury. It was a celebration. Families saved it for Sundays, weddings, or the rare night when a few extra coins made their way home from the docks. Each raviolo was handmade, soft dough rolled thin on wooden tables dusted with flour, filled with ricotta or bits of leftover meat. Mothers and daughters worked side by side, sealing the edges with their fingertips, while grandfathers stirred the sauce, a thin, fragrant tomato broth kissed with garlic and oil. It wasn't heavy or rich. It was simple, pure, and deeply human. A taste of the old country reborn in New York. When the family sat together, bowl steaming, laughter filled the tiny room. For a few moments, the world outside, the noise, the rent collector, the cold, disappeared. In that light sauce and soft pasta, they found something money couldn't buy: home. 3. Pasta e fagioli. In Little Italy, pasta e fagioli, or pasta fazool, as locals called it, was more than dinner. It was survival in a pot. Cheap, hearty, and endlessly forgiving, it turned scraps into comfort. A pot of beans simmered all day on the back of the stove, thickened with a handful of macaroni tossed in near the end. Onions, garlic, and maybe a bit of pork rind gave it soul. Most nights, there was no meat at all, just beans, pasta, and faith that tomorrow would be better. When the wind howled through the tenements, families gathered close, spoons scraping every last drop from chipped bowls. It was warm, filling, and tasted like endurance itself. Immigrants joked that pasta e fagioli could cure anything: hunger, heartache, even homesickness. And maybe it did, because in every spoonful was proof that you didn't need wealth to feel rich. Just beans, pasta, and love thick enough to carry you through another day. 4. Penne with garlic and olive oil. When the cupboards were nearly bare, penne with garlic and olive oil, or aglio e olio, came to the rescue. It was the dish of the desperate, the proud, and the practical. In the tenements of Little Italy, it was said, you could feed 6 people with a single bulb of garlic and a splash of oil. The smell alone could lift the spirits. Garlic hit the hot pan with a hiss, sending that golden, nutty aroma through every hallway. A pot of penne boiled nearby. No frills, no sauce, just the basics done perfectly. Tossed together, it became something greater than its parts, silky, fragrant, alive. Even the poorest families could afford this small comfort. And yet, it tasted rich, not from ingredients, but from memory. Each bite carried whispers of Naples, whispers of home. In a world that often took so much away, this humble pasta gave something back: warmth, dignity, and the simple joy of making something out of almost nothing. 5. Pasta with anchovy and toasted breadcrumbs. When cheese was too expensive, which it usually was, pasta with anchovy and toasted breadcrumbs stepped in to save dinner. Italians in Little Italy called it the poor man's parmesan. Anchovies, cheap and salty, were dissolved in hot oil until they vanished into flavor. Garlic followed, then a handful of breadcrumbs toasted golden in the same pan. Tossed with hot pasta, it made magic: salty, crunchy, rich, and deeply satisfying. No one cared that there wasn't meat or fancy sauce. This was flavor born from necessity. In those narrow apartments, mothers could turn 3 ingredients into a feast. Children would lick the crumbs from their plates, laughing as if they were eating something fit for kings. It was humble, yes, but it carried the soul of the sea, the memory of southern Italy, and the brilliance of people who refused to go hungry without joy. Even now, one bite of anchovy and breadcrumb pasta tastes like resilience, the flavor of making do, and still making it delicious. 6. Tortellini in broth. In the cold New York winters, few things felt as comforting as tortellini in broth. Steam fogged the windows, and the sound of bubbling pots filled every floor of the tenement. For families who came from Bologna or Modena, it was a taste of home. Tiny rings of pasta stuffed with scraps of meat, floating like treasures, in golden broth. But in Little Italy, meat was a rare luxury, so the broth was often made from bones begged from the butcher, simmered for hours until every drop carried flavor. A few tortellini went a long way, each one handmade, sealed with care, and saved for special days. Kids slurped the broth first, then fished for the tortellini like gold coins. It wasn't about how much they had, but how much love went into every bowl. Even in the hardest years, this dish reminded families that warmth didn't come from wealth. It came from patience, from care, from home. 7. Gnocchi in tomato sauce. When flour ran low, but potatoes were cheap, gnocchi in tomato sauce became the heart of the meal. Every grandmother in Little Italy had her way of making them. Some soft like clouds, others chewy like dumplings, all rolled by hand on floured tables under flickering gaslight. The sauce was simple: crushed tomatoes, garlic, and maybe a pinch of oregano if someone could spare it. The gnocchi hit the boiling water, rose to the top, and were scooped out like little victories. Each bite was soft, warm, and comforting, a reminder that even in the hardest times, love could still be tasted. For Sunday dinners, kids lined up at the table, eyes wide as the pot hit the table. No one ever left hungry. Even if there wasn't much, there was always enough. In those kitchens, gnocchi wasn't just food. It was a message that something tender could come from something humble, and that even potatoes could carry a family's hope. 8. Stuffed shells with cheese and meat. When Sundays rolled around, stuffed shells with cheese and meat turned every tenement kitchen into a celebration. It was the kind of meal that made neighbors knock on the door, hoping for an invite. The aroma, garlic, tomato, browned beef, and bubbling cheese, filled the hallways long before dinner was served. Mothers would mix scraps of ground meat with ricotta, breadcrumbs, and parsley, then spoon the filling carefully into each shell. Everyone felt like a little gift, lined up neatly in a pan, ready to bake under a blanket of red sauce. The oven door opened, and out came gold, bubbling, fragrant, rich enough to make the poorest family feel like royalty for one night. Plates were passed, laughter echoed, and for a moment everyone forgot about rent, work, or hunger. It wasn't about the ingredients. It was about abundance in spirit. In Little Italy, these stuffed shells were proof that love could fill you fuller than any meal ever could. 9. Fettuccine al burro. Long before anyone in America had heard of Alfredo sauce, there was fettuccine al burro, pasta with butter, pure and simple. In the tenements of Little Italy, butter was precious, so this dish was both comfort and luxury rolled into one. A pot of wide fettuccine ribbons boiled on the stove, while a small pan melted butter until it turned golden and nutty. Sometimes a spoon of milk or a sprinkle of grated cheese joined the mix, but often it was just the butter, coating every strand like silk. Families would gather around, bowls steaming, savoring that rich, simple flavor. No meat, no tomatoes, no garlic, just warmth and quiet pride. It was a reminder that even the simplest ingredients, handled with care, could taste like heaven. For immigrants far from home, fettuccine al burro was a whisper of elegance, proof that dignity didn't require wealth, only love, patience, and a little butter. 10. Pasta alla Norma. In the summer heat of New York, when eggplants filled the pushcarts along Mulberry Street, families brought back a taste of Sicily with pasta alla Norma. It was a dish born of sunlight, fried eggplant, rich tomato sauce, and a handful of cheese if fortune allowed. Women stood by small stoves, turning slices of eggplant in sizzling oil, their wrists glistening with heat and pride. The smell alone drew neighbors to the window, earthy, sweet, and unmistakably southern Italian. Once the sauce met the pasta, it became more than a meal. It was memory on a plate. Each bite carried whispers of Catania, of narrow cobbled streets and sea breezes. For many, it was the closest thing to going home. Even when ricotta salata was too expensive, they found a way, a dusting of breadcrumbs or nothing at all. Because the secret wasn't in the cheese or the oil, it was in the heart. And in Little Italy, pasta alla Norma was proof that the old country still lived, one forkful at a time. 11. Orecchiette with greens and garlic. From the region of Puglia to the streets of New York came orecchiette with greens and garlic. The little ears, pasta tossed with bitter greens and a whisper of spice. In Little Italy, it was one of the simplest, healthiest, and most symbolic dishes of survival. Immigrant mothers used whatever greens they could find. Dandelion leaves from the market, turnip tops from discarded crates, sometimes wild mustard picked from vacant lots. Boiled and sautéed with garlic and a splash of oil, they became a meal full of flavor and strength. The tiny orecchiette were handmade, thumb-pressed, rustic, imperfect. They clung to the garlicky sauce like they were made for each other. Children didn't always love the bitterness, but their parents smiled, knowing this was the taste of home. It was more than just dinner. It was a lesson passed down, that you can turn hardship into nourishment, and that what's humble can still be beautiful. Even today, that mix of greens, garlic, and pasta still carries the scent of courage, the taste of families who made a new life, one meal at a time. 12. Pasta with mushrooms and butter. When autumn rolled into New York and the air grew cool, the smell of pasta with mushrooms and butter drifted through the narrow streets of Little Italy. It was a dish that reminded immigrants of forest paths back home, earthy, simple, and comforting. Fresh mushrooms were a luxury, so most families used dried ones, soaked in warm water until soft again. That soaking liquid, rich and woodsy, became the secret ingredient. Butter melted in a small pan, mushrooms sizzled, and the scent filled every corner of those cramped apartments. The sauce was light, but full of soul. Tossed with hot pasta, it felt like a hug after a long day of hard work at the docks or the factories. No tomatoes, no meat, just the deep flavor of the earth and the comfort of something warm. In every bowl, there was a kind of peace, the quiet joy of creating something tender out of scarcity and tasting a little bit of Italy on a cold New York night. 13. Farfalle with peas and cured pork bits. In the springtime, when peas were cheap and the markets were bursting with color, farfalle with peas and cured pork bits became the dish of the season in Little Italy. It was bright, humble, and packed with flavor, a reminder that even the smallest things could bring joy. The pork bits weren't fancy pancetta or imported prosciutto. They were scraps Trimmings from the butcher, saved and salted to make every ounce count. Fried until crisp, they released that smoky aroma that made every neighbor peek through the window. Then came the peas, sweet and soft, stirred into the sizzling pan before meeting the bow-tie pasta. Butter or a splash of broth tied it all together, making it taste far richer than it really was. Kids loved it. The color, the texture, the promise of something warm and cheerful after long days in the crowded streets. In every bite, there was a quiet message that life, like pasta, didn't need to be perfect, just shared. 14. Spaghetti carbonara. Before it became a restaurant classic, spaghetti carbonara was a working man's meal, born from hunger, not a luxury. In the early 1900s, Italian immigrants in New York made it with what they had: eggs, bits of cured pork, and plenty of black pepper. Simple, honest, perfect. In tiny kitchens lit by gas lamps, mothers whisked eggs in chipped bowls, while fathers fried pork scraps until crisp. When the hot spaghetti met the eggs, the steam created a silky sauce. No cream, no fuss, just pure magic from heat and timing. The smell of pepper and pork filled the room, cutting through the chill of another long winter night. For a few precious minutes, the world slowed down. Every forkful tasted like survival done with style. Proof that even the poorest families could cook like kings when love led the recipe. It wasn't just food, it was Italian ingenuity at its finest, taking the bare minimum and turning it into something unforgettable. 15. Pasta Puttanesca. Sharp, bold, and unapologetic, pasta Puttanesca was the dish for those who refused to fade quietly into hardship. In the noisy tenements of Little Italy, it was the meal that woke up the neighborhood. Anchovies, olives, garlic, and capers. Ingredients that shouted flavor even when money was scarce. The sauce came together fast, bubbling in a single pan. The air filled with salt, spice, and attitude. The smell of southern Italy reborn in New York. Each ingredient carried a story. Anchovies from the docks, olives from a neighbor's jar, a pinch of red pepper from a shop that trusted you to pay a little later. Families laughed as they ate, the sauce staining their plates and their fingertips. It was messy, loud, and full of life, just like them. In a time when meals were quiet and humble, pasta Puttanesca was defiance served hot. A reminder that even in struggle, flavor and pride could never be silenced. 16. Maccheroni Bianco. When tomatoes ran out or money ran short, families turned to Maccheroni Bianco, the white macaroni. It was pasta stripped down to its soul. Oil, garlic, maybe a splash of milk or a pat of butter if luck was good that week. This was the dish for lean days, when the pantry echoed and the rent was due. Yet somehow it still tasted like love. The noodles glistened in a light sheen of oil. Garlic slices browned just enough to perfume the whole kitchen. Children would twirl their forks, laughing, unaware of the struggle behind the meal. No sauce, no garnish, no luxury, just warmth. The kind that came not from ingredients, but from the hands that made it. In Little Italy, Maccheroni Bianco wasn't just a recipe, it was resilience. Proof that even when times were hardest, a family could still sit down to something comforting, share stories, and find joy in the simplest bowl of pasta. 17. Baked pasta with seafood. When the smell of the sea drifted up from the markets near the docks, families in Little Italy knew it was time for baked pasta with seafood. This was celebration food, rich, fragrant, and alive with the flavors of home. Fishermen sold small clams, scraps of fish, and broken mussels for pennies, the parts no one else wanted. Immigrant mothers brought them home proudly, turning the day's leftovers into a masterpiece. Pasta was tossed with tomato sauce, bits of seafood, and breadcrumbs, then baked until the edges turned golden and crisp. The aroma was irresistible, garlic, salt, and sea air all mingling in the oven heat. Neighbors would tap on the door, asking, "What are you making tonight?" When it came out, everyone gathered around. There was laughter, clinking forks, and the taste of victory in every bite. For families who once lived by the Mediterranean, this dish was memory reborn. a bridge between New York's harbor and the waters they left behind. 18. Pasta with fresh fish in tomato broth. In the early mornings, the men of Little Italy would walk to the Fulton Fish Market, where the air smelled of salt and hard work. Whatever they could afford, small fish, heads, or bones, came home in paper wraps. By nightfall, those scraps became pasta with fresh fish in tomato broth, a meal born from the sea and stretched by love. The broth simmered all afternoon, rich with garlic, herbs, and the essence of the ocean. Tomato gave it color, pasta gave it heart. Kids dipped bread into their bowls before the pasta even hit the table, soaking up every drop. It wasn't restaurant food, it was family food. The kind that made you close your eyes after each spoonful, just to remember the coastlines you left behind. The broth was thin, but the flavor was deep, a reminder that even in a city of noise and cold, home could still be found in a pot of simmering fish and tomato. 19. Pici with wild herb and garlic sauce. Long before pesto jars lined supermarket shelves, Pici with wild herb and garlic sauce brought the scent of the Tuscan countryside to New York's tenements. Pici, thick, hand-rolled strands of pasta, were made by mothers who didn't need machines, just patience and strong hands dusted with flour. The sauce was pure improvisation. No basil, no pine nuts, just what the city could offer. Wild herbs gathered from empty lots, maybe parsley or dandelion greens, pounded with garlic salt and a drizzle of oil. It was sharp, green, and alive, a taste that cut through the city's gray. When the hot pici hit the pan, the herbs hissed and released their perfume. Dinner became a celebration, even on an ordinary night. It wasn't fancy, but it was defiant, a statement that flavor could grow anywhere, even in the cracks of a foreign city. In every bite, there was earth, memory, and the quiet pride of people who refused to let their roots die. 20. Strascinati with roasted peppers. In the glow of tiny kitchen flames, Strascinati with roasted peppers painted dinner in the colors of southern Italy, red, gold, and smoke. Strascinati, a rustic pasta from Basilicata, meant dragged, because every piece was pulled by hand across the board, pressed and stretched by generations of tired but loving palms. When bell peppers flooded the markets in summer, families bought them cheap, roasted them over the open flame, and let the skins char just enough to smell like fire and sweetness. Mixed with garlic, olive oil, and sometimes a few olives, it became a sauce as bright as the old country itself. The pasta soaked it all up, the pepper's sweetness, the smoke, the oil. It was sunshine in a bowl, defying the soot and shadows of tenement life. And as the family gathered, passing plates from hand to hand, it wasn't just a food, it was a promise that even in a strange land, they could still taste the warmth of home, one roasted pepper at a time. 21. Casarecce with anchovy and herb sauce. When payday came late and the pantry looked bare, Casarecce with anchovy and herb sauce was the quiet miracle that saved dinner. The twisted pasta, shaped like tiny scrolls, held onto every drop of flavor. And flavor was everything when ingredients were few. Anchovies were the secret weapon. Cheap, salty, and rich, they melted in oil until invisible, leaving behind only that deep, savory taste Italians call umami, long before the word was ever known. A handful of herbs, parsley, maybe oregano, gave it color and life. Mothers stirred it slowly, humming songs from Calabria, while the children waited, forks in hand. The sauce glistened, simple but proud, the smell filling the whole building. There was no meat, no cheese, no luxury, yet no one complained, because this was old-world wisdom at work, that a good meal didn't depend on wealth, only skill and heart. Each plate reminded them that even in a new country, the old traditions could still feed both stomach and soul. 22. Bigoli in onion sauce. If there was ever a dish that turned tears into comfort, it was Bigoli in onion sauce. Originating from the Veneto region, this was the pasta of the patient. Thick, rough noodles pressed through hand-cranked machines, made to hold on to every bit of sweet golden sauce. In Little Italy, onions were cheap, abundant, and reliable, the backbone of 1,000 dinners. Immigrant mothers sliced them thin, let them sweat slowly in oil until their sharp bite softened into sweetness. The air filled with the caramel scent that made hungry children crowd around the stove, eyes watering from both smoke and anticipation. Tossed with the bigoli, the sauce turned silky and rich, proof that flavor didn't need luxury, just time. It was a working man's feast, a poor family's comfort, a dish that made people stop and breathe even after the longest days. In every bowl of bigoli in onion sauce, there was a quiet lesson that even life's simplest ingredients could bring you to tears, not from sadness, but gratitude. 23. Trofie with pesto-style herb and garlic. Before basil was easy to find in New York markets, Trofie with pesto-style herb and garlic carried the spirit of Liguria across the ocean, even if the ingredients had to change. Trofie, those small twisted strands of pasta, were made by hand, rolled between palms dusted in flour, and set to dry on the kitchen table. There wasn't pine nuts or fancy cheese. Immigrant cooks used whatever they could: parsley, wild greens, or even spinach leaves. Crushed with garlic, salt, and a splash of oil, it became a humble cousin of pesto, green, fragrant, and alive. When tossed with the warm Trofie, the sauce clung perfectly, releasing that bright, earthy aroma that turned even the smallest meal into a feast. Neighbors might wander in, drawn by the smell, and leave with a plate. Because in those tight communities, food was never just food, it was connection. Trofie with pesto-style herb and garlic wasn't just about flavor, it was about memory, the taste of sun, soil, and family, preserved in a single, shining bowl of green. 24. Pasta allo scarpariello. Translated as the shoemaker's pasta, pasta allo scarpariello was born in Naples but found a new home in the heart of Little Italy. Legend says it was invented by cobblers who traded shoes for leftover cheese and tomatoes, proof that even the working class could create a masterpiece. In New York, the spirit was the same. A few ripe tomatoes, smashed in a pan with garlic and oil, became the base. Then came scraps of cheese, ends of parmesan, bits of ricotta salata, anything too small to sell. Melted together, they turned into a velvety sauce that clung to every strand of spaghetti or penne, like sunshines in silk. It wasn't elegant, but it was honest, fiery, fragrant, and full of heart, the kind of meal that made you sit back and smile after a hard day's work. For Italian immigrants, pasta allo scarpariello was more than a dish. It was a philosophy that even the poorest man could live richly so long as he knew how to turn scraps into something beautiful. 25. Pasta and vegetable minestrina. When money was gone and winter was long, pasta and vegetable minestrina kept families alive and hopeful. It wasn't quite soup, not quite pasta, but something in between. A steaming bowl of broth, vegetables, and just enough noodles to make it feel like a meal. Every ingredient had a story. A bruised carrot from the market, a potato found at the bottom of the sack, a handful of broken pasta pieces saved from the week before. All went into the pot, simmering slowly until the flavors became one, humble, nourishing, and full of love. Children called it poor man's feast, but to their parents it was gold. It filled empty bellies, warmed cold fingers, and reminded everyone that home wasn't about abundance, it was about togetherness. As steam rose from those chipped bowls, families found strength in every spoonful. Pasta and vegetable minestrina was the taste of endurance, proof that even in the hardest times, a little warmth, a little flavor, and a lot of heart could still feed hope itself. When we think of Italian food today, we picture abundance, overflowing plates, melted cheese, rich sauces. But for the immigrants of Little Italy in the early 1900s, it was never about excess. It was about making something from nothing. Every pot of boiling water carried the story of struggle, pride, and survival. From macaroni with tomato and garlic to pasta and vegetable minestrina, each dish was a piece of home rebuilt from scraps. The steam rising from those tiny kitchens wasn't just food cooking, it was hope lifting. Families found comfort not in what they had, but in what they created together. Those recipes traveled through generations, from crowded tenements to suburban kitchens, from survival to celebration. And maybe that's the real legacy of Little Italy, not just the pasta itself, but the spirit behind it. Because in every twirl of spaghetti, in every humble bowl of broth, lies a truth that built America's table. Love makes the meal. If this journey through Little Italy stirred your appetite or your heart, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe and join us as we uncover more forgotten recipes that shaped America's past. Drop a comment below with the pasta your family grew up eating, or the one you still make today, because every old recipe tells a new story. And somewhere, right now, another pot is boiling, keeping history alive, one meal at a time.